Hey guys, it's Sarah, and it's time to pick my favorite books that I read in 2018. And this was probably the hardest that I've had to do this. Like, picking your favorite books and stuff. I had the hardest time with this one than I've ever had before. I read some amazing books. I read a lot of 5-star reads this year, and it was really hard to pick. I think I did okay. I think I'm at peace with my decision. But there was a few that were fighting it out till the end, and I struggled a little bit. I would normally do like a top 10, but I couldn't narrow it down to 10. So I have a top 12. And that's just going to be what it is, because I literally could not take one of these off the list. I was like, no, these are my babies. This is it. This is my group of my favorites, and none of them can part with each other. Like, they just have to all live together on this list. I'm going to go in no particular order for 11, and then I do have a number one favorite. So one of these beat out everything else by this much, but it did beat everything else. And so everything else is just going to be one of my favorite books this year, and it's not going to be like in any sort of list, but I did categorize them by genre. So I have a few contemporary, I have a couple of thrillers, and then I have a big stack of fantasy. That was actually the biggest category for me this year, was fantasy. I've read some really great fantasy books. I'm really getting into that genre and thinking it's something that I'm going to be really getting into a whole lot more, because they were all 5 stars and I love them all so much. So I think fantasy is, I'm becoming a fantasy lover for sure. All right, let's start with contemporary. And this is only one book. I only have one contemporary on this list, mainly because I read some contemporary this year, definitely, but it's not my genre of choice. So I have to it has to be something really, really interesting to me. But the one contemporary that is on my list this year is Colleen Hoover, because it can't be Colleen Hoover. I can't have a book read by her and not have it on my favorites list of the year. It's impossible. This one, All Your Perfects, was fantastic. I hounded Lindsay from Lindsay's Little Library while I was reading this. She was in meetings all day at her job, and I was reading this, and I kept sending her messages consistently while I was reading it. And I was like, oh my gosh, she's going to have 15 messages when she gets out of her meetings today from me reading this book and crying and, oh my gosh, all these feels, what's happening? Why am I feeling this way? I don't know what's going on. I don't know whose side I'm on, and blah, 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 and all these things. And she was just like, I told you. And she did not mind at all having all those messages. So this one's going to make you feel things. It's Colleen Hoover. I'm a big fan of hers, obviously. And so this was definitely my favorite contemporary of the year. All right, let's move on to historical fiction. I had 2 on my list for this one. The first one is The Life She Was Given by Ella Marie Wiseman. This is a book that was on my birthday reading project, and I'm so happy it was, because it has become one of the best books I've ever read. It is about a young girl who gets sold to the circus by her family because they're ashamed that she was born as an albino. And this is taking place in the early 1920s. So things like that were kind of frowned upon, or, considered freakish and all that stuff. And they sell her to a circus. So you see her growing up in the circus, what is happening because of that, which some terrible things happen. But she also meets, lifelong friends and builds really strong relationships through all the turmoil and things that are happening. One of the most beautiful scenes I've ever read in a book is in this book, and it involves elephants by a river, and it is just beautiful. I can still picture that scene in my head, and it's so gorgeous, and I just absolutely loved it. I remember reading this, and just the characters, I cared about them so much, and it had been a while since I had really cared about characters the way that I cared about the characters in this book. And Ella Marie Wiseman is an author that I will be visiting again, and I'm very excited about that. Another historical fiction that I read that I do not own, but it's one that I wouldn't mind having on my shelves. I just don't own it physically. I did read it on my Kindle, and that is Before We Were Yours by Lisa Wingate. And this one follows a true story. It's a fictionalized true story. So it's based on an orphanage that was in Tennessee, and it follows a woman named Georgia Tan, and she was the head of this orphanage. However, this orphanage was extremely corrupt in the way that she acquired these orphans was by stealing them away from rich families and kind of looking for a certain type of baby that were going to appeal to people, like pretty, blonde hair, blah, 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 just very desirable, I guess you could say. And she would basically sell them to rich families. And she would not only kidnap, but she would convince the parents that there was an accident and their child died, all the while she's shoveling them into a van and taking them to an orphanage. They were completely malnourished. They were not taken care of. They were abused. And it's very sad, because while I was reading it, my heart was breaking, but it was breaking even more because I knew that this was based on something that actually happened. And it just broke my heart completely. And yeah, it was a very sad story, but told in a very beautiful way. And it was a hard read, but it really impacted me like big time. All right, so our next category we're going to go to is thrillers, and I only have 2 in this category, which is interesting because thrillers are kind of like my favorite genre, but I only had 2 that really stood out to me this year. The first one is Unsub, and this is by Meg Gardner, and this is the first book in a detective series where there's an FBI detective and she hunts serial killers. That's one of the big things that she does. And she ends up trying to track down a serial killer that is very inspired by the Zodiac killer. There's a lot of different trends that you see with this killer and how he's carrying himself and how he's taunting police very publicly and how they cannot figure out who in the world this guy is. And a lot of parallels with the Zodiac killer. The results are not the same, and it's not like an exact copycat, but you can tell there's inspiration there. You can really tell that. And that's what I loved about this book is that, she took an actual serial killer and put it into a fictionalized place, and you can just see the parallels. And it was super fast paced. I loved the characters, and yeah, it was definitely a thrilling book. Like, it gave the word thriller meaning in this one. And I was so surprised by how much I really loved it. This is another one I don't own, but I wouldn't mind having it on my shelves because I did love it that much. But Unsub was like my ideal thriller. It was fantastic. Another thriller that I ended up reading this year was another one that was a new to me author. I had never read this author before, and that's Those Girls by Chevy Stevens. I really enjoyed this one. This one is dark. It is a dark thriller. It follows a set of sisters. There's 3 of them, and something happened in their childhood that causes them to be on the run, basically, for their lives. And you follow them trying to survive as young kids and kind of how they make everything work. And you're following them a little bit through the years as well. And things are coming back to haunt them, and they're put in some really bad circumstances, and you see them, kind of cope with that. And this one, it was one of those books that you're just like, can these girls catch a break? Like, really? But that made it very interesting, and it explained why they made some of the decisions that they made. You kind of understood, even though they were really bad decisions, you understood why they made those, and you question whether or not you would make them as well. And yeah, it was very dark, very good. I really, really enjoyed this, and I'm super excited to read more from this author. All right, let's dive into the fantasy, because this is definitely the biggest stack that I have. And I think I have 6 fantasy books here to talk about that were just big time standouts. I couldn't pick a favorite. Like, I loved all of them so much. The first one is The Final Empire by Brandon Sanderson. This is his first book in his Mistborn trilogy. And this one stemmed from me asking you guys to pick a trilogy for me to binge read. This was on there. This won like all the votes almost. And I was like, great, I'm going to read that trilogy. And I read the first one. And for some reason, I did not pick up the other 2. And I don't know why I did that. I don't know why I just read this and then never picked up number 2, even though I said I was going to binge read the trilogy. I really wish I had. So books 2 and 3 are going to be very high on my TBR for 2019, like very soon, because I loved this. I was a little intimidated going in because I know it's an adult high fantasy, and I wasn't sure how it was going to be written. I wasn't sure if it was going to go over my head or not, because fantasy can be very intimidating. It's a whole new world. It's a whole different language sometimes. And, you kind of have to wrap your head around some of the stuff happening. This was so smart. His writing is incredibly smart, and the way that he weaves things together to make it so that you can easily understand what's happening. You can easily picture what's happening. And he will put in just these little nuggets of detail that just make it so clear in your head that, you know, maybe other authors wouldn't think to put in such a little detail about that, but it made such a big difference in the way that I experienced the book and the way I could picture everything happening. It blew my mind the way that he was able to do that. He did not dumb anything down. I didn't feel like it was fantasy for beginners or fantasy for dummies in this one. It was an epic high fantasy. It really was. And I was able to follow it no problem. And I understood it. And the magic system in here is incredibly interesting and easy to follow. It's all about consuming metals. So they consume metals like, you know, nickel and copper and silver and gold and steel and, you know, all those things. And it gives them different types of powers. It's so interesting. I'm halfway tempted to reread this and then read the rest of the series. I haven't decided if I'm going to or not, but I'm tempted to do it. Like, I liked it that much that I would reread this, no problem. I might need to. It's been, I mean, by the time I do get to, you know, read this whole thing, it might be a full year in between. So maybe I should reread this one and just kind of actually binge read the trilogy like I said I was going to in the first place. I may think about that, to be honest. But it's incredibly smart. I loved it. I loved the characters. Things surprised me, and it's definitely got me on the Brandon Sanderson train. Like, I'm on board. I'm strapped in. The next one is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. Now, this one took me a little bit longer to get into. It started off a little bit slow, and it was kind of, it took me some time to get into. I guess that's like the easiest way I can say it. It took me a while to get used to the world, to get used to the characters, to get used to the footnotes. There's a ton of footnotes in here. But once I hit it, and once, you know, I was in, and I was a goner after that. And I flew through it after that. It did take a little bit of time, but it was worth it. The humor in here is fantastic. This follows a girl named Mia, and she is in an assassin school, basically, in this training program to become assassin. And she is trying to get revenge on the government who killed her father, who she believes killed him wrongfully. And it was brutal. Mia's no joke. Like you hear the word, like, you know, badass chick, but she legit, like, she doesn't take any crap from anybody, and she's ruthless. She really, really is. There were some things that happened in here that took me by surprise. And, you know, you kind of see things happen a certain way, and then you're like, oh, but this is actually happening. Okay, very interesting. And it was very smart that way. I really liked the training regimens that they went through and the trials that they had to go through in their school. It was very, like, people died in this training. Like, it's no joke. You have to be able to prove yourself and be able to handle this kind of stuff. And yeah, I loved it. I loved it so much. It was very funny. There was a lot of humor in here, and I am really, really excited to read the rest of this trilogy this year, for sure. That's definitely going to happen. I already have number 2. Number 3 is going to be released later this year. I will be pre-ordering that one for sure. And yeah, I absolutely loved it. So I've definitely become a Jay Kristoff fan. All right, this next one. Oh my goodness. Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I loved this book, and this is, I would say, this year, this might be the most hyped book, I think. And not just on BookTube, like throughout everywhere. Jimmy Fallon picked this to be his book club summer read for over the summer. It was voted on by America, but like, this was in there and it won hands down. And so everybody was reading this book. And oh my gosh, to me, this completely deserves all the hype that it has been getting. So this follows a tribe of people who used to have magical powers, or they still do have magical powers, but the government has banned all magic from happening ever, anywhere. Like, you cannot use your magical powers. It is illegal. And it got to a point where it has been like that for so long that they believe they can no longer practice magic. Like, they don't even have the ability to practice magic anymore. That's not the case with this one. This one can practice magic. And she ends up teaming up with the princess of the government, like the king and then the princess, who was one of my favorite characters. She was fantastic, but she really saw a lot of injustices happening and said, this is not okay. We should not be treating our people this way. And she runs off and ends up forming an alliance with her and her brother, and someone else comes into the mix. And oh my gosh, it's so good. It was really action packed. There was a lot of action in here, a lot of brutal action as well. And it was just, I loved it. I loved it so much. I could not put it down. I really read this pretty quickly, and I cannot wait for book 2. I've already pre-ordered it, and I will definitely be reading that as soon as it hits my hands. Like, that's going to be a very high priority for me, but I loved it. The writing was beautiful. I was really shocked that this was a debut novel, and yeah, so the hype is real, and it's real with me too. And the next one is another one that I read for my birthday reading project, and I just became obsessed with it. And that's An Ember in the Ashes by Saba Tahir. I was expecting to pick this up and enjoy it. I became obsessed with it. I could not put this book down. This one is so action-packed, and it's like beginning to end. Like, it didn't stop. It was crazy good. It kept me like, just not, I could not put this book down. I really read this really quickly. And this follows a girl named Leia, and she has had her family torn apart, basically. Her parents were killed. Her brother is put in jail, and she goes to kind of an underground society who's really kind of like against the government type thing, like a rebel group, I guess you could say, asking for help to get her brother out of jail because she believes they are the only ones who could actually pull this off and get him out. And they said, okay, but in turn, we need you to do something for us. And she poses as a slave and kind of infiltrates a military school who is raising all these soldiers, to support the government. And she poses as a slave and meets up with some people. One of them is a student in this military academy, and he has a whole lot of conflictions himself. And I won't give anything away about why, but oh my gosh, that's so good. And you see them form an alliance. You see them fighting back. You see him struggle. There's a lot of gray area with him. And I can't. It's so good. It is so good. It's, again, just so action-packed. I was really surprised by that. And things that were happening surprised me, but also made so much sense. Oh, it's so good. Okay, that's all I'm going to say, but I cannot wait to read the rest of this. I absolutely loved it. All right, so this next one is Furyborne by Claire Legrand. Oh my gosh, did I love this book. It was such a surprise, and I was very lucky to get an ARC copy from Bookish First. So very happy about that. And this one follows 2 different queens in this kingdom. It's the same kingdom, but 2 different time frames. One is set kind of in their present time, whatever. And then one is set 1,000 years earlier. And so the 1,000-year earlier one is kind of like a legend and, part of their history, but you're following both of them. You're jumping back and forth. One of them is a blood queen. The other one is a sun queen. So blood queen, kind of like not so good, a little brutal. Sun queen is supposed to be the bright light, the good queen, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, a lot happens in here. I feel like a lot happens that I can't really tell you because I feel like you should go into this not really knowing much else other than that, because things transpire and it keeps you interested and you keep going. There are fantastic relationships in here. There was a love triangle that ended up, like, I just love the way it was done. And I really enjoyed I enjoyed all of it, but I really enjoyed the one that was in the past a little bit more because she has to go through these trials to kind of prove that she is the chosen queen. And it gave me really big Hunger Games vibes with that, like going through some trials and all that, and the way that it was kind of presented, that it was kind of a spectacle and all that. So that was kind of cool. Okay, I can't say anything else, but oh my gosh, did I love this. And the way this ended, I cannot wait for number 2. I've already requested an ARC. I don't know if I'll get it or not. If I don't, I will buy it on release day, and I will get me a hard copy of this one too, because this is a trilogy I'm going to want on my shelves for sure. And oh my gosh, I loved it so much. Okay, one more fantasy. You probably know what this is. I read it recently. Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor. Okay, this one was probably my most intimidating read this year. I put it off all year long. And finally, I said, okay, this is happening. I'm picking it up. And okay, I was afraid of this one because I was afraid that it was going to go over my head. I was afraid it was going to be too whimsical and I wasn't going to understand the point, or I was going to be like, I don't get this. Oh, I got it. I got it. It was beautiful. It really was. I've already read Laini Taylor books in the past, so I knew her writing was very lyrical and all that. So the writing didn't necessarily scare me. It was just, I think how vague people were about it who have read this kind of scared me a little bit, because they were like, I can't really explain it. And I'm like, then why am I going to pick this up then? But I get it. Like, I can't really explain it. I get that. You don't want to explain too much, because I think going into this a little bit blind is the best way to go. I really do. Because, you would kind of give away a little bit too much. But it follows a librarian named Laszlo Strange. He is obsessed with this city called Weep, and it's kind of a lost city. It's been kind of forgotten and almost wiped out of people's minds, and it's almost considered a myth. But he has always had the belief that this place was real. It's still there. I want to find it one day. He's done a lot of research on it. And one day, a troop of people walk into his town and say, we are from this city, and we need a big group of people to help us with a certain task that's going to help save our city, basically. And he gets picked to go on this, and the way that happened was so great. And he goes to the city and sees it and experiences it and meets the citizens and understands what's happening, and everything is not as he had always imagined. It was so good. The magic in here was so incredibly interesting. There's a moth on here for a reason. That was so interesting to me. And, okay. Yep. It was fantastic. The way this ended, I cannot wait to read number 2. I already have it in my possession. I will be reading that very soon. And this is one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It really is. So if this is something that intimidates you, don't let it. Pick it up, because it intimidated me, and I'm so happy I picked it up. And this is legit. All right, guys, we made it. My number 1, my favorite book that I read this year. You probably already have guessed what it is. But man, it was hard. It was hard to narrow it down. It really was, because I read some really beautiful books this year. But this one just, Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. Like, it edged everything else out. Like, oh, I'm not kidding by that much. And so I guess I lied. This is a thriller. So 3 books, 3 thrillers on my list. But this one really made me fall in love with her as an author. This one, okay, so we follow a woman who is married. She is the younger sister of a girl who went missing while she was in college and disappeared and was never heard from again. And it was kind of assumed that she was dead, but nobody ever knew where she went or what happened. Nobody knew. So you're following her as an adult. This happened when she was young. And then as an adult, she's married, and she's starting to question some things about her husband. Some things are starting to kind of not add up a little bit. And there have also been some surfaces of women being taken and murdered, and calls into question things that happened to her sister, because there's just some similarities happening there with her disappearance as well. So all this is happening simultaneously. Ooh, okay, that's all I'm going to say, because so much happens in here. The thing about this book is that Karen Slaughter was not afraid to go there. She was not afraid to make you nauseous and to make you squirm and to make you go, ugh. but I can't stop reading it. There was a point in here where I had my shirt over my nose. I was just like, oh, because something pretty gross happened. There are still scenes in this book that I can vividly picture, and I don't want to, but they're there. Like, it's one of those things where an image is burned in your brain. Like, you can't unsee that. Even though I didn't see it, I read it, but I could see it. And yeah. Okay. So I loved it so much. It's one of my favorite thrillers. And if you enjoy dark thrillers and you can handle brutal content, pick this up like ASAP. You will not regret it. If you're a little too squeamish for things like that, maybe don't. Maybe go with one of her less gruesome books, like The Good Daughter would be, it was still shocking, but it wasn't as brutal as this one. There was like 1 or 2 scenes and that was it. This is like, a whole lot. And I loved it. So that's my jam. Yeah. So this is the best book I read this year for me, and I absolutely loved it. And I am a Karen Slaughter fan for life. All right, guys, that is it. Those are my top books that I read in 2018. It was really hard to narrow it down, but like, that's it. I absolutely loved every single one of those books, and every single one of those books will stay with me. A lot of them are getting me into a new genre for me, which I'm really excited about to continue into 2019. Let me know down below if you read any of them that I talked about. Let me know what your favorite books were for this whole year that you read, whether it came out this year or not. If you read it in 2018 and you loved it and it was your favorite, let me know. I want to know what those are. All right, that's going to be it for me. I can't believe 2018 is over. It's so crazy to me. But I'm excited for 2019 and just to get some really good reading in. All right, I hope you guys are having a wonderful holiday season. Stay safe, and I will see you guys again very soon. Have a great day.